Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update.
Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we will be analyzing the important news appearing in the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 18th June 2020. The topics to be discussed today are reflected on your screen and the timestamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. So let's start. Now this news appears on page number 8 and it is with respect to the NRC and the NPA. Now the context is that the Andhra Pradesh Assembly has passed a resolution opposing the National Register of Citizens, that is the NRC, and the National Population Register, NPR, on the grounds that some of their clauses are highly objectionable and need to be set right as they might be used against the minority communities. Hence, in this regard today, we will be talking about the NPR, its relationship with Aadhar, the differences between the two, and we'll also be looking at the difference between NRC and the NPR. Now, this discussion of ours is very important from the prelims perspective and also from the perspective of the mains examination under GS paper 2 in the category of issues related to governance. Now, as majority of you must be knowing, last year in December, there was a lot of hue and cry when the government passed the Citizenship Amendment Act of 2019. And after the passage of this act, the debate shifted to NPR and the subsequent formulation of an NRC by the government, which in a way was seen as discriminatory against the minorities. So while this issue was ongoing, in our DNS, we covered all the aspects in much detail. However, for the benefit of the students who have subscribed to us in the recent months, I will very quickly explain to you what this issue was. Now, in December itself only, the Union government approved almost 4,000 crores for the National Population Register exercise. And like I mentioned, after the passage of the Citizenship Amendment Act of 2019, the NPR was being seen by many as a first step towards creation of the NRC. Now, though the government has tried to de-link both NRC and the NPR, however, the fears still remain. Now, to very quickly tell you, NPR is nothing but a comprehensive identity database. And this database will be maintained by the Registrar General and the Census Commissioner of India under the Home Ministry of India. Now, NPR basically lists all the usual residents in India. Furthermore, the NPR is being prepared as per the provisions given under Section 14 of the Citizenship Act. Now, Section 14 of the Citizenship Act of 1955 clearly states that it will be mandatory for every usual residence in India to register themselves under the NPR. Hence, this tells us that the NPR is a compulsory process for the people of India. That is, they cannot refuse or deny to be registered under the NPR. They have to do so. Now, the data for the NPR is going to be collected through house-to-house enumeration during the house listing phase of the census. Now, the last census was conducted in 2010 and the next is going to be conducted in 2021. Though by April, the house listing process for this 2021 census should have started, but following the COVID-19 lockdown, this has now been postponed. However, that's a separate issue. So as far as the definition of NPR is concerned, all you need to know is that NPR is a comprehensive identity database and it will be maintained by the Registrar General and Census Commissioner of India, which is an authority under the Home Ministry, and that the legal genesis for the NPR flows from Section 14A of the Citizenship Act of 1955. However, from the perspective of the prelims, what becomes more important is to discuss the difference between the NPR and the Aadhar, as well as the difference between NPR and the NRC. So we are going to focus on that. However, please don't worry, the details about the NPR have been provided for in the PDF. So, of late, many of you have complained that they are unable to read my handwriting or that what I write appears to be very small on the screen. But please try to understand, I do so because whatever I am speaking, almost 90% of this has been provided to you in the PDF. So, if I start to type and write, it occupies a lot of space on the screen. And ever since I have been doing DNS, one of the constant requests from the students was that we should try and provide information in one slide because a lot of you click screenshots and use those screenshots later for revision. So you can understand, if I type everything and write in full sentences, one topic will run into 5 and 6 slides, which then again makes the process of revision difficult for you. So the information in point wise for the NPR has been given in the PDF. Let us talk about the difference between NPR and Aadhar. Now let us talk about the relationship of NPR with Aadhar. Now at the outset, please remember that irrespective of the fact whether you are enrolled for Aadhar or not, you have to compulsorily and mandatorily register under the NPR. So that gives us our first point, that your NPR is compulsory, however registration under Aadhar is voluntary. So beginning when the idea of Aadhar was conceived, it was made voluntary. However, this government then made Aadhar compulsory. Now they did not specifically use the word compulsory, but what the government did is that they made Aadhar number compulsory if citizens wanted to avail certain benefits. So they said Aadhar is compulsory for ration card, Aadhar is compulsory to open a bank account, you have to link your PAN card with Aadhar, so on and so forth. However, then in 2018, the Supreme Court clearly stated that Aadhar is voluntary and it is not compulsory, which simply means that it is up to the people whether they want to register for Aadhar or not. However, the only place where Aadhar is compulsory is that you have to link your Aadhar with your PAN card, that too when you're filing income tax return. Now before I continue, there's one thing you need to take a look at. Now it is not the first time that we are going to conduct NPR in a country. Earlier also NPR was conducted in the year 2010. However, the difference this time is that while collecting NPR, government is now going to be collecting certain additional information. So these points are the new information which the government is asking for people when they are taking information about the NPR. Here you will see Aadhar number, mobile number, date and place of birth of parents, place of last resident, passport number, voter ID card, PAN number, etc. All these are information which the government is now asking. However, if you will see here, it is clearly written that providing Aadhar number is voluntary. Very logically, if you have an Aadhar number, you would give it. However, giving Aadhar number while collecting NPR has been made voluntary because, as I stated, Aadhar itself is voluntary. So very logically, there might be people who do not have an Aadhar number. Hence, giving Aadhar number can be made voluntary in the NPR exercise. And in fact, it is this new information which the government is asking that is a bone of contention for the Andhra Pradesh government, because the government feels that due to these new information, what the central government is trying to do is that they are trying to map people in the sense that they want to identify certain cultural minorities and then probably discriminate against them. Now coming back to the difference. So I was telling you what is the relationship between National Population Register and Aadhar. So as I stated, even if a person is registered under Aadhar, they have to compulsorily register under the NPR. If you are enrolled with the Aadhar, biometrics will not be collected again. And if you are not enrolled, then the data which was collected in the NPR then will be sent to the UIDIA for issue of the Aadhar number. So if you do not have an Aadhar card and you give your demographic as well as your biometric data for the NPR, then that information will be sent to UIDIA and they will generate an Aadhar number for you. However, if there is a discrepancy between the data which you have provided under the Aadhar and the NPR, then the NPR will prevail. So the second difference is that NPR collects both demographic and biometric data, whereas Aadhar only collects biometric data. Then NPR is a nationwide project, whereas only 16 states have enrolled for the Aadhar exercise. Now this number of 16 states is liable to change in the future. All you need to remember is that not all states have enrolled for Aadhar. However, NPR will not be conducted in Assam because recently only we carried out the NRC exercise in Assam, so that will lead to duplication of efforts. Now your NPR basically consists of 3 elements. As I stated earlier, it includes your demographic data, it includes your biometric information, and it also includes your Aadhar UID number. On the other hand, Aadhar only consists of that 12-digit UID number which you get. Now the second difference is that NPR is a register or an identity database of the usual residents of the country. Now, usual resident is defined for the purpose of NPR. Any person who has resided in a local area for the past 6 months, or any person who intends to reside in that area for the next 6 months or more. On the other hand, Aadhar is for residents of India. It does not mention usual residents of India. So under Aadhar, you might be a resident of, let's say, Punjab today, and you might then just shift to some other state later on. However, that does not have much bearing on your Aadhar status. However, for NPR, we are taking into consideration where you are staying for the last 6 months. Next important difference is with respect to the intention or the purpose behind these two. Now, the fundamental purpose of the NPR is to provide a credible database for identification of the individual and to avoid all the shortcomings in the existing database. And creating this credible database of all the residents in our country will help to improve the overall general governance. However, on the other hand, the main aim of Aadhar was to identify the various beneficiaries of the government welfare schemes such as subsidies, DBTs, etc. Hence, it is due to this reason NPR is not a citizenship enumeration drive. This word is like a tongue twister. And the reason why it is not a citizenship enumeration drive is because NPR will also include foreigners. If you will look at this term, it says National Population Register, and it is an identity database for usual residents in India. So the term used here is residents and not citizens. So since we are also including foreigners in this register, it cannot be a citizenship enumeration drive. And as far as Aadhar is concerned, Aadhar too is not considered as a proof of citizenship. And this exact statement directly was asked in the 2018 prelims as well, where a question related to Aadhar was asked, and one option was that it is a proof of citizenship, whereas no, Aadhar is not a proof of citizenship. The only aim of Aadhar is to simplify the process for the government, where the government is better able to identify its beneficiary so that it can stop or curb the various leakages in the subsidies and welfare schemes, and also ensure better targeted delivery of various welfare schemes. Now, when the government said that they're going to start with the NPR process, there was a lot of protest by the people. The reason for this protest was simple. There have been apprehensions that this exercise of NPR will eventually lead to what is known as National Register of Citizens. And as has been our experience from Assam's NRC, all those people who are not registered as citizens in India and are identified as illegal migrants will be deported back. And how NRC is an issue, that I will talk to you about in a few minutes. First, let us talk about the difference between NPR and the NRC. Now, NPR is a population register, whereas NRC is a citizenship register. Because NPR, as the name suggests, National Population Register, will have a list of all the usual residents of a country. That is anyone, including the foreigner, who has lived in India for more than 6 months, regardless of their nationality. However, NPR is a register containing details of the Indian citizens, both living in India and outside India. So please keep this point in mind, that NRC includes citizens living in India and citizens living outside India as well. Third point, of course, is that NPR will include a foreigner, whereas NRC will contain details of only the citizens of India. Now, it is not the first time that we are conducting an NPR. NPR was also conducted in 2010-11, and the database of NPR will be maintained by the Registrar General of India and the Census Commissioner under Ministry of Home Affairs. On the other hand, as far as history and origin of NRC is concerned, NRC was first prepared for Assam only in the year 1951, and then the process of updating that NRC of Assam started in 2015, and very recently it was concluded. Furthermore, in 2019, the Government of India made an amendment in the Foreign Tribunals Order of 1964, and by this amendment, they have expanded the scope of NRC beyond Assam. So which now means that NRC can be conducted for other states or for India as well. And it is here that the problem lies. Next is the difference as far as their intention, object or purpose is concerned. As stated earlier, NPR's process is to have a credible database of identification of individuals, whereas the main purpose of NRC is to document all the legal citizens of India so that the illegal migrants can be identified and deported back. Now, NPR is based on self-declaration, whereas NRC, of course, requires proof of your citizenship. Then NPR needs both your demographic and biometric information, whereas in NRC you only require to give demographic information. Now, since we are running short of time, I will just quickly tell you what the problem with NRC is. Now, as you must be knowing, the government has passed the Citizenship Amendment Act of 2019, and the bone of contention with respect to this act is that 6 minority communities from 3 countries, namely Bangladesh, Afghanistan and Pakistan, will not be considered as illegal migrants in India. So basically any person belonging to Hindu, Sikh, Buddhist, Jain, Parsi or a Christian community from Bangladesh, Afghanistan or Pakistan who have entered India on or before 31st December 2014 will not be considered as illegal immigrants. Now the main problem here is that the Muslim communities from these 3 countries have been excluded. And as you must be knowing, there was a lot of movement of Muslim peoples into India, especially from Bangladesh after 1971. Hence, it is felt that after this Amendment Act, Muslims will be identified and then they will be deported back to their home country. And this is clearly an alleged discrimination. Now the question, is NPR directly connected to NRC? Well, the answer is no. Directly it is not linked. However, the Citizenship Act empowers the government to compulsorily register every citizen and maintain an NPR. However, if later on an NRC is made, this NRC will be based on the data collected in this NPR. So this does not necessarily mean that an NRC must follow an NPR. However, the fear is that only when the government will conduct NPR, it will have all the database regarding the details of the people, that is who is a citizen, who is not. So basically the idea will be after NPR, we will be able to segregate people who are citizens of India and who are the non-citizens. So all those people from these 6 minority communities of Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists, etc., except Muslims who are non-citizens will not be considered as illegal migrants due to this Citizenship Amendment Act of 2019. However, Muslims who have not been given this benefit under this Amendment Act of 2019 will then be considered as illegal migrants and be deported back. So this is the major issue why there is so much of uproar with Citizenship Amendment Act of 2019 because once the NPR process starts, people feel that it would eventually lead to a national register of Indian citizens. And then this National Register of Indian Citizens combined with the Citizenship Amendment Act of 2019 will lead to Muslims being discriminated and being deported back or outside of India. So this was all about this issue. The differences between the 3 of them, that is the NPR, NRC and Aadhar, becomes important from the perspective of the prelims. With this, let's take up our next news. Now this next news appears on page number 12 titled Assessment of OIL Well Blowout Impact Begins. Now a few days back there was a blowout in one of the Oil India Limited wells in the Tinsukia district of Assam. Now a team of the Energy and Research Institute have begun assessing the impact on the environment around the Bhagjan natural gas well which caught fire after a blowout on Wednesday. Now, blowout means an uncontrolled escape of gas at tremendous velocity. And this Bhagjan oil well has been burning since bursting into flames on June 9. Now, TERI is using the bioremediation of sludge in order to treat this blowout. Hence, in this context, let us see what is bioremediation, the 2 ways in which bioremediation is carried out, and what are the factors for effective microbial bioremediation. Now let us first understand what exactly is bioremediation. Very simply put, bioremediation is when we use microorganisms to either eliminate completely or at least reduce in concentration the various hazardous pollutant or waste at a contaminated site. Hence, the process of cleaning of polluted sites through naturally occurring or introduced microorganisms to break down the environmental pollutants is known as bioremediation. Now, in many cases, bioremediation is less expensive and more sustainable as compared to other remediation alternatives. Now, this bioremediation is very similar to the approach which is used to treat waste, including wastewater, industrial waste, solid waste, etc. So please remember that these microorganisms can either occur naturally or can also be introduced externally into that contamination site. Now, there are two specific techniques of bioremediation, namely in situ and ex situ. Now, in situ bioremediation means treatment of the contaminated area in the location where it is found originally. Hence, in situ bioremediation is done at the containment site itself. Now, the in situ bioremediation is a low cost, low maintenance and environment friendly, sustainable approach for cleaning up the contaminated natural surrounding. And as mentioned, it is done at the site of the contamination itself. Now, in situ bioremediation can be done majorly through three techniques. The first is bioventing. So, in bioventing, we supply air and nutrients through wells in order to stimulate the growth of the naturally occurring bacteria in the soil. So basically at the contamination sites, we dig up wells and then through that wells we supply air and nutrients so that the bacteria which are naturally found in that soil, their growth can be stimulated and then they can start to degrade the contaminants. The second technique is biosparging. Now in biosparging too, we inject air. However, this air is injected under the groundwater table. So the main difference between bioventing and biosparging is that in bioventing, we are supplying air and nutrients to the soil. However, in biosparging, we are supplying air under the groundwater. Now, the idea behind biosparging is same as bioventing, to increase the growth of the indigenously or naturally occurring bacteria at that site of contamination so that the rate of biodegradation by these microorganisms can be increased. And the third technique of in situ bioremediation is bioaugmentation. Now in bioaugmentation, microorganisms are imported to the contamination site in order to enhance the degradation process. Please remember that in bioaugmentation, we are importing the microorganisms. So the microorganisms which help to break down the contaminants are not naturally found in the soil. However, we externally or artificially introduce those microorganisms at the contamination site so that they can start to degrade the contaminants. Now, bioaugmentation can be done through bioreactors, composting, landfills, biopiles, etc. On the other hand, we have the ex situ bioremediation technique. And as the name suggests, under the ex situ bioremediation technique, the waste or the contaminated soil is taken to some another area for the bioremediation process. So the contaminated waste is first removed from that particular area and then taken to a treatment area. Now, ex situ bioremediation technique is usually employed in those circumstances where the climate is too cold for the microorganisms to develop and start their activity in a particular contamination area, or where the soil is very dense for the nutrients to spread evenly. Next, let us quickly see what is the exact process. Now, in bioremediation, from a chemical point of view, the process involves oxidation reduction reactions. Now, oxidation reduction reactions are a kind of chemical reaction. So, these oxidation reduction reactions are carried out in two ways. Firstly, either we introduce an electron acceptor, which is commonly oxygen, and this oxygen then leads to oxidation of certain pollutants such as hydrocarbons. So the first process is that we add oxygen or air. The second idea is that we add an electron donor, which is usually some kind of organic substrate. Now this organic substrate then helps to reduce the oxidized pollutants such as nitrate, oxidized metals, chlorinated solvents, explosives, etc. So just remember that the chemical reaction behind bioremediation is oxidation reduction reaction. Next, let us talk about what are the factors which are important so that an effective microbial bioremediation can take place. First is microbial population, which is obvious. certain kind of microorganisms act in a better way against certain kind of pollutants. So we need to choose suitable kind of microorganisms that can biodegrade all types of contaminants. Second is the availability of oxygen. We need good amount of oxygen present at the contamination site so that we can support aerobic biodegradation. Second is the amount of water. So the moisture level in the soil or at the contamination site should also be around 50 to 70% of the water holding capacity of the soil. Fourthly, we require certain kind of nutrients. So nutrients like phosphorus, sulfur, nitrogen, etc. help to better support the process of microbial growth and further the process of bioremediation. Fifth, we have temperature. We require a certain range of temperature if we want bioremediation to work properly. And that ideal range is somewhere around 0 to 40 degrees. So therefore, if the area is too cold, we have to transport that contaminated pollutant or the soil to some other area. And that is one of the reasons we do employ ex situ bioremediation technique. Last is the pH level. Now the best range of pH should be around 6.5 to 7.5, which basically means it should neither be too acidic nor too basic or alkaline. So this was all what was important for this article. Let us take up our next news. Now this news has been taken from page number 6, and it is with respect to the public-private partnership in the healthcare sector. Now, the present health catastrophe caused due to COVID-19 has put severe strain on the healthcare services and infrastructure within India. In this regard, there is a need for much greater collaboration between the public and the private sector in the form of PPP to deliver the healthcare services. Hence, in this regard, today we will be focusing on the following 4 dimensions. Firstly, the present problems with the healthcare sector, how the PPP model can lead to better health outcomes, and then the problem and challenges associated with the healthcare. First, let us talk about what are the problems of the healthcare sector in India at present. The foremost problem is that India as a country spends very less on healthcare sector. Currently, our combined expenditure of both the centre and the various state government on the health is only 1.5% of India's GDP. However, this is way less than the target set under the National Health Policy of 2017, which is aiming for a 2.5% expenditure of the GDP on the healthcare sector. The second problem is of high out-of-pocket expenditure on health. Now in India, the total out-of-pocket expenditure as a percentage of the total healthcare expenditure is as high as 60%. And this is on account of the fact that the people incur a lot of expenses on medicines, diagnostic facilities, consultation fees, etc. In fact, this higher out-of-pocket expenditure on the healthcare services is one of the main reasons why a lot of families are pushed below the poverty line in India. So even if a family is well-to-do and can afford the basic necessities in life, if any one of the family member falls seriously sick, half of the savings of that family goes into the treatment of that person, finally pushing them below poverty line. Third problem is of the lack of accessibility, especially to the various secondary and tertiary care hospitals in the rural areas. Now, most of the secondary and tertiary care hospitals are located in Tier 1 and Tier 2 cities and are not found easily in the rural areas. Hence, people living in the villages and the rural areas found it very difficult to access secondary and tertiary care. Moreover, it is not just the hospitals, even doctors are very unwilling to go and practice in the rural areas. This too leads to lack of accessibility to healthcare. Fourth is the lack of affordability. Now, though the private players in the healthcare sector are pretty dominant in the Indian scenario, almost 80% of the healthcare expenditure in India is borne by the private sector, while only 20% is contributed by the public sector. Furthermore, out of all the hospitals, 58% of them are run by the private sector, and almost 81% of doctors in India work in the private sector. However, the problem here is that the private sector works on a profit motive. So since they work on a profit motive, they charge exorbitantly high fees from the people, and since these fees are so high, the poor patients or the poor people are unable to avail their services, thereby not getting quality medical services at all. The fifth problem is the shortage of medical personnel in India. Now, it has been reported that in India, we have 3.4 doctors per 1,000 citizens and almost 3.2 nurses per 1,000 citizens. This is incredibly low when we compare it with other countries like China and Italy. China has 18 qualified doctors per 1,000 people, whereas Italy has almost 41 doctors for 1,000 people. Furthermore, our problem is then exacerbated due to our poor infrastructure. In India, we have just 70 beds for 1 lakh patients or people for 1 lakh people and 2.3 ICU per 1 lakh people. This again is incredibly less when we compare it with China, which has almost 420 beds for 1 lakh people, and Italy, which has almost 340 beds for 1 lakh people. Now, the next point is that these already existing problems are set to increase considering the fact that India is going to undergo a demographic change in the next 2 decades. Now, in the next 2 decades, that is almost by 2041, the share of elderly population in India will increase from 8% in 2011 to almost 16% in 2041. Furthermore, there has been an increase in the various lifestyle diseases in India as well, and this increases the overall pressure on the healthcare infrastructure in our country. Next, let us see how we can apply the public-private partnership so that we can have better health outcomes. First, we can use the PPP to improve the efficiency of the hospital management. So what could happen is that government can hand over the management of an existing public hospital to a well-established private partner under a partnership agreement with the responsibility that the private sector will invest for the hospital's upgradation, expansion as well as management. Furthermore, the interest of the poor can also be protected by fixing the maximum fees which can be charged by the private sector player. In fact, the fees of such poor people can in turn be paid by the government. Second, we can use the PPP to enhance investment in the healthcare facilities. Now, government can invest in land and building of a new hospital and could give the private partners the responsibility to bring the equipment and the staff. Furthermore, the private sector may be given the exclusive management role with the governments participating in the governing board. The maximum fee in such hospitals can also be fixed by the government, and such a PPP model will have multiple benefits as well, such as expansion of healthcare facilities, decreasing the government's burden, leveraging the private sector's strength of innovation and efficiency in terms of the human resources and equipments which they will get in the healthcare sector. Third is by addressing the shortage of the medical personnel. Now, the shortage of doctors within India can also be addressed through this PPP mode. Now, already in the Union Budget 2020-21, the Finance Minister said that now medical colleges in India will be set up in the public-private partnership model. Now, these medical colleges will be linked to existing district hospitals. Furthermore, the government can also provide the VGF or the viability gap funding to set up these medical colleges. Next, we can use the PPP to reduce the out-of-pocket expenditure as well. Now, the government can act as a healthcare financer, wherein the identified poor can get treatment in the private hospitals, and then their treatment cost can be paid by the government, and this in turn will lead to reducing the out-of-pocket expenditure. And as you must be knowing, this is already being done by the government under the PM Jan Arogya Abhiyan and has immensely benefited the poor people. Next, the participation of private sector can help to improve the accessibility and affordability of healthcare services as well. Now, some of the states such as Odisha have given out the management of the primary healthcare centers in that state at the village level to a private sector entity so that these private sector entities can improve the accessibility and efficiency of these healthcare services. Furthermore, at the same time, some of the states have entered into partnership with private sector laboratories so that these private laboratories can provide round-the-clock diagnostic tests at affordable cost in the government hospitals. Next, the private sector can help to ensure that we get safe, effective and affordable medicines in our country. Now already the government is implementing the Pradhan Mantri Bharatiya Jan Aushadhi Pariyojana, and under this scheme the government is providing cheaper generic medicines to the poor people through a network of Jan Aushadhi Kendra. Now this is a very unique kind of PPP model, because here the government is procuring these generic medicines in bulk from the private sector, and secondly this scheme is helping other non-governmental entities such as private sector hospitals, NGOs, etc. to set up Jan Aushadhi Kendras. Next, private sector can also invest in IT infrastructure. Now in 2011, the Srinath Reddy Committee, which was set up to give its recommendation on universal health coverage, said that we need to have a robust IT infrastructure, and only then can we successfully fight against mortality rates, high hospital admission rates, disease profiles, hospital bed occupancy ratios, etc. And hence the private sector can be used here because it has the expertise as far as infrastructure is concerned, and the private sector can be used to set up such an IT infrastructure. Last, we need to improve our preventive care as well. Now in this area, it is our civil societies which can contribute effectively in awareness generation programs, community mobilization programs, information dissemination, monitoring of health services, capacity building, etc. Therefore, we can also leverage under the PPP model various civil services organizations which can help to improve the health outcomes of the government. Last, let us see what can be the possible challenges for the public-private partnership to thrive in the healthcare sector. Now, the first point is that there is lack of trust and cooperation between the government and the private player. Now, the government believes that the private sector is profit-oriented and only wants to address the needs of the richer section. On the other hand, the private sector feels that the government creates unnecessary barriers in the form of various restrictive regulations, and this in turn makes it very difficult for the private sector to carry on with their business. Hence, they are reluctant to enter into any kind of partnership with the government. Secondly, in India, somehow there is a flawed perception as far as division of responsibilities is concerned. It is thought that the responsibility of the primary health care in India lies with the government, whereas the private sector has the responsibility to take care of the secondary and the tertiary health care. However, this perception is absolutely flawed and has to be done away with as quickly as possible. Fourth, there are a lot of constraints before the government in the form of lack of political will, the undercapacity of the government to design and actually implement and manage these public-private partnerships, and then systemically we face the delays in the government payments, due to which the entire process becomes very slow. And not just for the government sector, even the private sector has certain kind of constraint. The biggest one being that till now the government has not been able to offer any kind of financial incentive to the private sector to come and collaborate with the government in the healthcare sector. Hence, the failure of the government to provide any kind of appropriate incentive and reimbursements to the private sector is one reason why the private sector too is pretty reluctant. So these were the basic contours as far as a question regarding public-private partnership in healthcare sector is concerned. If at all a mains question comes on this topic, you have the ready material available. Now let's take up our next news. Now this news has been taken from page number 7, titled Multilateralism post-COVID-19, and this is an important topic from the perspective of international relations in GS paper 2. Now, to very simply put, in the international relations, multilateralism refers to an alliance of multiple countries which are pursuing a common goal. Now, the article has been written in a little confusing and vague manner. However, we have tried to simplify it, and let us talk about the basic or the most important points it is trying to put across. Now, at the beginning, the author is saying the COVID-19 outbreak in the entire world has in a way challenged the way of working of various multilateral international institutions, and in turn have brought them under the scanner. For example, if you will see, WHO is a multilateral institution. However, if you try to analyze the response of WHO in the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of people would argue that its response was below average or below what it was expected. Many even say that WHO could have better handled this situation and could have adopted a leading role, which it failed to do. So many countries drew up their own action plan and followed it to fight against the COVID-19. Furthermore, other multilateral institutions have reverted back to a very rudimentary kind of functioning mechanism, and this in turn has thrown the question in front of us regarding the usefulness of these multilateral forums in the world, especially after the COVID-19 settles down. To give you an example of the rudimentary kind of functioning, let us take the UN General Assembly. Now, the UN General Assembly is now passing resolution through a no objection procedure. So, unlike the previous or the normal times where there used to be a voting, now what happens is that the President of the General Assembly submits a draft resolution to all member states and asks them to file an objection in 72 hours. And if after 72 hours there is no objection raised by any country, then the President of the General Assembly declares this draft resolution to be adopted. Hence, this is how rudimentarily these multilateral institutions are functioning. As was the case earlier, even today the biggest challenge in front of multilateralism or the multilateral institution is its inability to reform or change. Now, in the world of multilateral diplomacy, change is not very enthusiastically accepted. And this is true even in the areas where there is a good deal of cooperation amongst the member countries. Hence, following the COVID-19, the world is realizing that it is a high time that the multilateral institutions need to bring in certain kind of reforms so that they can function more smoothly and effectively after COVID-19. So to answer the question, will multilateralism survive in post-COVID times? The answer is in affirmative. Now, as stated earlier, though it is considered very difficult, multilateral institutions, if they want to survive, they need to be reformed because they need to adapt to the new realities of the world. The biggest example is the COVID-19. Furthermore, another thing which needs to be realized is that this reform or this change cannot be ushered in by various member countries threatening to leave. The League of Nations collapsed because one state after the another kept on leaving it. However, if we will look at the multilateral organizations which came up after World War II, all such organizations have survived despite various superpowers like USA and others leaving or threatening to leave. If you are following the news, you already know that USA has left UNESCO, UNHRC. It is threatening to leave World Health Organization. It was blocking the appointment of judges in WTO. USA has also withdrawn NATO from WTO, so on and so forth. So a superpower like USA has already left these multilateral forum or is threatening to leave. However, despite the walking out of such big countries, these multilateral institutions are able to survive. And the reason for this is very simple. These multilateral organizations actually serve the global needs of the entire world. They do not further just the requirement of one big superpower. However, it addresses the needs and requirements of all the countries in the world. So you see, the idea here is that when we are faced with a pandemic like COVID-19, the only way to fight such an invisible enemy is to join hands and put a united front against it. And to do so, we require global cooperation. And global cooperation in the world is only provided by multilateral forum, where most of the states, whether small or big, are members. Now that we have answered the question that yes, multilateralism will survive in the post-COVID-19 times, the next question in front of us is how then should multilateralism be led? Should it be led by many Lilliputians or by one Iron Man? Which simply means that whether it should be led by various or many members or whether it should be led by one superpower. Now, if we analyze the changing international relations, we will notice that China is climbing up the ladder of multilateralism as its new leader, or at least that is what China is touting for. This is evident from the fact that currently Chinese nationals are heading 4 multilateral organizations. China is contributing almost 10% of the UN's budget and almost 14% of the peacekeeping budget as well. However, despite China's contribution, China has failed in campaigns to head the UNESCO and the WIPO. Furthermore, Chinese nationals, though are leading 4 multilateral organizations, they are not exactly overrepresented in terms of senior staff position. Hence, in this regard, it is felt that China is yet to display an ability to set the multilateral agenda and dominate the discourse of an array of issues. Hence, the author feels that China is not ready, either in monetary terms or in terms of certain substantive inputs, to take over these multilateral forums. Hence, the author is of the opinion that multilateralism survives on the notion of the Lilliputians trying up Gulliver, which basically means that in a multilateral forum, the ideal way is that many states should, in fact, in a way, not allow one superpower or one country to dominate. So the multilateral forum has to be led by Lilliputians and not by one Iron Man. Hence, it can be safely said that if this existing multilateral order is captured by a new hegemon like USA, this will be actually anti-ethical to the ethos of multilateralism, because these multilateral forums have many small and middle states also as their members, and these states are working to restore the balance or equilibrium in the world through the help of these multilateral forums. Hence, it will be unethical that the balance which these small and middle states are trying so hard to restore, that balance is tilted towards one superpower or hegemon. And then the fourth question which the author has asked is that will multilateralism in the coming time meander meaninglessly? Well, the answer to this is that maybe multilateralism will meander, however, its meandering will not be meaningless. Now, as stated earlier, the response of the various states during COVID-19 has reinforced the need to make sovereign decisions. In addition to COVID-19, of late, a lot of plurilateral or minilateral organizations are coming up. And these plurilaterals and minilateral organizations are very important to develop consensus and a kind of a balance. But as stated earlier, the global norm setting requires a lot of time and inclusivity, which they actually lack because they are dominated by one superpower. Furthermore, as far as India is concerned, India too should also look for issue-specific coalition amongst the various willing countries. So, for example, these days India is collaborating with a lot of countries on anti-terrorism or anti-terror financing issues. So these are some of the areas which India can explore, where India can pick up an issue and then, kind of make its own coalition. Hence, in conclusion, we can say that India, since it visualizes the world as Vasudev Kutumbakam, that is, the world is one big family, we need to continue to support multilateralism. Furthermore, we need to know that though the process is slow, bringing in reforms in these multilateral institutions will augur well for the entire world, and therefore we need to very patiently promote these reforms while building partnerships with other countries on certain issues to avail opportunities which can pave the way for more fundamental change in the future. Hence, India should remember that neither permitting the capsizing of the multilateral order nor allowing it to be captured is in our interest. So these are a few points related to multilateralism which you can use in your answers if at all a question is asked on this. Now with this, let's take up our next news. Now this news appears on page number 9, titled "With China, India will have to be Aatmanirbhar." Now the recent Galwan Valley incident in Ladakh is the most serious national security crisis our country has faced since the 1999 Kargil War. Now this incident has been a game changer post the idea of Wuhan spirit. Now, as you must be knowing, India and China jointly advocated the Panchsheel, or the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence in the year in 1950s. Now the Wuhan spirit is also in line with the idea of Panchsheel, and under the Wuhan spirit, India and China have agreed that both countries will form the backbone of economic globalization and should jointly make positive contribution to the global peace and development. Furthermore, both the countries have agreed for the first time ever to cooperate on a joint project in Afghanistan. Furthermore, China has also indicated that India's refusal to join the Belt and Road Initiative will not come in the way of their economic cooperation. Now you have to understand that despite the tension at the border between India and China up till now were very craftily managing these border differences and had a brisk trade going on between them. However, it is felt that this incident which has happened in the Galwan Valley will also likely to affect the trade between India and China. Hence, in this regard, it is felt that it is time that India has to make certain strategic choices as far as China is concerned. The first of this choice is that India now needs to decide to what extent will she participate in various multilateral forums. Because one of the reasons why India joined these multilateral formats was so that these formats or these multilateral institutions could serve as a common platform where India and China could have certain confidence building measures. However, this Galwan Valley incident clearly points to the fact that such multilateral forums have failed as far as confidence building between India and China is concerned. And it was for this confidence building measure only that India joined Russia-India-China meetings. It embraced BRICS and it also joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization as a full member recently. But though at one hand where India has been joining these multilateral forums where it could get a chance to communicate and have a dialogue with China, India has also revived and reinforced its Quad format, which is basically a consultation between four countries, namely India, US, Japan and Australia. And the main idea behind this Quad consultation was to come up with a strategy where China could be contained globally. And this decision of India to reinforce and join the Quad, of course, have obviously irritated China. So it is felt that one of the choices in front of India could be that India can pull out or leave RIC, BRICS and SEO, because as is evident, these multilateral forums have failed to develop any kind of confidence between the two countries of India and China. Secondly, it is felt that now it is a good time for India to actually evaluate very objectively the impact of the decision to dilute Article 370. Because following the government's decision to revoke Article 370 and reconstitute the state of Jammu and Kashmir into the Union territories of J&K and Leh Ladakh, China has clearly stated that this decision of India has damaged China's territorial sovereignty because India has unilaterally modified the territory of Jammu and Kashmir by taking a help of a domestic law. Thirdly, it is felt that India should now discover some new kind of ways or levers to pressurize China, because it is a fact that whatever international powers, be it superpower or other important countries which India is trying to build a good relationship or friendship with, all these countries, for instance, let's say USA, are locked in transactional trade relations with India. So it is like hate China, love China, but you cannot ignore China. So for the entire world, most of the countries, they are dependent on China, at least for trade. Hence, even though these countries do not like China, they have very flourishing trade relations with China. So India needs to realize that all these countries, including USA, will only ask India to have a restraint and have a dialogue with China and nothing more. Of course, these countries won't say, go at war with China, we are backing you. No one will do that. So hence, it is now time that India has to, find out some new kind of ways to pressurize China, because taking the help of other superpowers is clearly not going to work here. Hence, in this regard, this article said that India will now have to be Aatmanirbhar as far as China is concerned. At the same time, as far as the line of actual control is concerned, Army should retain its position, should hold its ground at the line of actual control with China, and the government of India should ensure that it provides all the sources to Army to hold its ground. So this was a very small and crisp article. Let's take up our next news. Now this article appears on page number 6, titled History, the Standoff and Policy Worth Rereading. Now, this article has been written by Suhasini Haidar in context of the ongoing standoff between India and China. Now, we have already spoken a lot about the India-China conflict. However, this article here today is giving us two new points related to examination. The first is the palm and finger theory or the five-pronged theory of China and India's counter three-pronged strategy. Let us talk about palm and the five-finger strategy of China. Now, as per this strategy, China considers Tibet as its right palm and has taken upon itself the responsibility to liberate the five fingers, namely Ladakh, Nepal, Sikkim, Bhutan and the Northeast Frontier Agency, or what is presently known as Arunachal Pradesh. So basically, China considers Tibet and these five areas as its right hand. Furthermore, this application of strategy by China is very much visible in China's occupation of Tibet and China's assertion along the India-China border in areas of Ladakh, Sikkim and Arunachal Pradesh in the past as well. However, to counter China's palm and five-finger strategy, India also developed a three-pronged strategy. The first prong or the first phase of this strategy was to manage its border so that we can develop infrastructure and governance along the India-China border. And now to complete this goal, India built the Indian Frontier Administrative Service, which will oversee the NEFA or the Arunachal Pradesh area and other areas along the India-China frontier. Now the IFAS was a service which would overlap between the IFS, IAS and the IPS service, and the officers of the IFAS service were to be posted in the remote tribal areas along the India-China border. Additionally, a special desk was also created in the Ministry of External Affairs, where the officers would tour all the regions from NEFA to Ladakh in order to make suggestions for the rapid development process of these areas. So firstly, India thought that let us manage the borders or the areas along the India-China borders by developing infrastructure and a governance system. And for that, it came up with the Indian Foreign Administrative Services. Hence the authors of the opinion that there is a need to revive this idea of specialized service similar to the IFAS. The second prong of India's strategy was its outreach and treaties which it signed. Now, India had signed a lot of important treaties with its neighbors such as Nepal and Bhutan. Furthermore, India also through various measures increased its control, both military and administrative, over the territories along the India-China border, and this India has done by including Ladakh as part of the JNK, as well as converting Arunachal into a full state. Furthermore, it also made Sikkim part of India in 1975. Furthermore, in 2007, India revived the Treaty of Perpetual Peace and Friendship, which was signed between India and the government of Bhutan, and it has been now renegotiated into India-Bhutan Friendship Treaty. However, the 1950 Treaty of Peace and Friendship between India and Nepal has not been renegotiated. Hence, this is one of the reasons for Nepal drifting towards China in its foreign policy. Hence, the authors of the opinion that such treaties are important because they create a space for a more mutually responsive diplomacy. And this mutually responsive diplomacy is very necessary to nurture special relations, especially such sensitive and strategic one. The last pillar to India's three-pronged strategy was the Tibet issue. Now, as you must be knowing, India provided shelter to Dalai Lama and his followers in 1959. And though it did not sit well with China at all, India needs to push for the rights of the Tibetan refugee community and also future the leadership of Tibetans after Dalai Lama. Last but not the least, the author is of the opinion that India needs to introspect the reorganization of Jammu and Kashmir in August 2019, which has been cited as one of the key reasons for the recent Chinese assertion in the Galwan Valley. Hence, in conclusion, the author says that there is need for the current government to learn from the past strategies that India has followed, which necessarily involves focusing on the five fingers of China, that is Ladakh, Nepal, Sikkim, Bhutan and the Northeast Frontier Agency. With this, we come to an end of this discussion. Let's take up the question for the day.